So along with the dark brown wash, I can add a light rust wash, and then there's these rust streaks. And obviously, this is the rust streaks. I'll open up right now. And you'll see the difference. So we've got a real nice orangey, rusty color here, but see how thick that is?
Right.
Because that's one of the streaking effects. See, it's not even running down the cap, basically.
Right.
Now compare that to the wash.
Yeah.
It's much lighter, and it's just parting right away. So we're going to use these colors to enhance some of this stuff here. And once again, my particular technique, and people do it completely different to me, I like to pre-moisten. For me, it just works better. And what you've seen here is that I just did that brown wash through here, so I'm going pretty fast on this, and probably too fast for that effect to really grab hold. But I'll just be mindful of that and kind of go around it a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of hit some of these areas here and let this flow over. And what I'm going to do on purpose is I'm going to go back and forth between the two colors. Okay, so right now grab some of that wash instead, and I'm just going to kind of pop up here and do this. And then here's a little bit of the other color, and I'm just going to kind of poke it down in here.
Okay, so again, the wash, very dilute. It'll flow really nicely over your pre-moistened surface. And the streak, what is the
streaking grime just kind of sits there.
Right.
Now, I might do...
You just kind of want a mottled effect here, right?
I kind of want a mottled effect, and I'm just... And for these to be actually, especially the streaking grimes, or the streaking effects, for them to be very effective, they actually have to sit up on your surface for a little bit. They have to kind of grab hold, and then you can streak them. Otherwise, you're using them closer to the wash, which is kind of what I'm doing right here. I'm going to show, so when I talk about streaking effects, that can be any color. It can be these rust, it can be some of these dust effects, it can be some of the dirt effects that will come later. When I get to the dirt effects and like the rain marks and things, I'll be able to show you really the proper application for the streaks. This is a little bit tighter in here, and I'm using them in a kind of a different method than what they're intended to do. I mean, not that they're not intended to do this, but the application method just slightly different than what they're intended. Another nice thing you can do is, let's just say, we're just going to do some pretend stuff here. Let's just say that this little part right here has some corrosion on it and a little bit of rust. So we can take our wash, the rust wash, and give it just a little light application. You see, and now it's changing the color of that just so it looks like it's got a little bit of corrosion on it. It's started to oxidize a bit for some reason. And then we could do the same thing in like right here. And part of the reason I'm doing this may not be completely accurate to our story, because like I was saying, engines don't necessarily rust all that much, but they do oxidize, they do change colors, patinas a little bit. But more than that, I want to show a little bit of interest, because we will be able to see kind of this area once the panel's on. So I'm working on making just a little bit of interesting color contrast between some of these different places. And for better or worse, reddish brown colors tend to pop out against the black colors nicely, so that's why I'm using them. Adding more blacks on black is tough. Again, we're not paying attention to the labels, but I have this a Rocky Freedom color. There's our color right there. But I'm looking at this going like, you know, I could use this color like on this line right here. Give it some different color texture on it. A little bit of variation. And I'm going to let that sit, but over the top of that while I'm doing this, remember this line I wasn't too worried about it rusting because it's probably a water line, but I'm just going to add a little bit of, I'm just kind of dabbing across this with a little bit of my rust color wash, and or I've used both the effect and the streaking thing. And I'm just going to kind of blend that in now. And as it dries, you're just going to get kind of an undercurrent of this color coming through. This particular oil filter or air filter here, that's probably a good place to add some more of this dark brown wash. So we're going to do it the same way we did before. It's going to pre-moisten this all the way around. And the reason I'm doing that is just to promote this wash to travel. I just want it to move. So I'm just going to put some on top and kind of help it around. And we'll let gravity kind of do its thing here. And then what I'll do, in this case, because it's sitting there pretty hard. It's not really moving. Add some more thinner to the top of it, and just wipe it off a little bit, and kind of add thinners around here and let it just kind of run down. And over, there you go. You can kind of see it moving.
Right.
So we'll just let that go, and that will just dry up, and then all these little bands and clasps and stuff will start to become visible. Okay, we got a special effect here. It's called fuel stains, and the difference between this effect and these other effects, two of the differences are: one, it's a glossy appearance. So this has got gloss in it, versus these are a flat and matte a product. Some of these have satin, some of these have glosses, some of these are matte, and you'll have to look at the label to find out for sure which is which, but I'll try to point them out as I go through the mix here. But the glossy appearance is going to give us that illusion of a wet stain. So this will remain glossy after it dries, whereas these are all going to come back to a matte finish after they dry. But let's just play some games here. Let's do some what ifs. Let's just say for some reason we have an oil leak and it's going to hit this surface right here.
Right.
Or some sort of a stain. So I'm just going to grab a little bit out of here. Let's drip down on this surface, and we're just going to apply this. When this gets dry, you're going to have a glossy
blob.
A little glossy blob here, like, oh, something's spilled down in this corner, and maybe it kind of trickled off and ran off this edge here like that. We can enhance that. Remember, we have this engine grime color, but around the edge of this, we could put like where it's kind of dried up and collected some dirt. So we can do this as a two-part process, like that. So, and then maybe because I kind of overdid the grime, I can add a little bit more fuel staining here just to make sure that they're thick enough that they'll stay where they are right now. So they'll dry as they are right now. They won't run across each other.
Right.
Unless I add some thinner to it. And this is one of those deals where if I'm going to enhance that, if I'm going to really make this to a convincing stain, I'll need to come back a few times on this. But here's a place right here. I'm just noticing this on camera. So we've got this shiny appearance here right now, and that's just simply because our effects are still wet. But let's just say that one of these rods is leaking here. So let's go ahead and we're going to just drop some of this down into here. So if we can remember, we'll come back and look at some of these a little bit later after everything else is dried, and we'll see, oh, look at that, we've got a little bit of a moisture stain right there.
Yeah, that looks cool.
So we'll start doing that. Okay, so we're back. This took maybe 15 seconds on the hair dryer, but just want to, you know what a hair dryer sounds like, so we don't need to do that. But this is now dry. That's how fast the enamel is dry, and you can see everything's gone back to a fairly matte finish, and especially on the other side. We'll see it on the exhaust pipe, but you can see it here where this is all dried up and gone to a back matte finish. And you can see how these effects have unified all that chipping and stuff through here. So now it just looks like an old dirty can. Things of interest that we want to take note of here, though. Remember back in this little corner here, we added some of that fluid stain to get a shiny stain. We wanted to keep that going. Well, this is all dry. Everything's gone to a matte finish, except for that little part right there where we added those fuel stains. So now this oil leak or whatever we have, this fluid leak, looks fresh. We have some gloss onto it. And the same thing in this area up here. We kind of put all those different effects together, blended them together, pulled them across each other, but now we have this real interesting leak that's gone here. It looks a little bit of rust along this edge here, maybe where some water's accumulated and stains have come out this way. So this is stuff that we could continue to work on if we were to really take this to a real high level of fidelity, but we're not going to worry about that right now. But the techniques are there that you can just keep working with it. On this side here, you can see that the exhaust pipes have dropped back down to a matte finish. All these things, those little washes of rust that we put on here and there, they're still there. They're not really making a rust effect per se, like similar to what we have on the pipes, but they're adding a little bit of corrosive nature, and that's what I'm looking for. Just a little bit, for when you pull back a little bit, that we've got some difference in our our parts. It's visually interesting to look at. Again, we're making it look kind of busy, look a little bit worn. So the next thing I want to do here real quick is we're going to add a little bit of a dust effect on this, because obviously we're going to get dust and such thrown up onto this engine. I'm going to switch to two different colors. We've got an Africa dust effect and a Kursk earth effect. And really what you want to look at is the backs of the bottles. We've got a light brown and a yellowish brown. And individually and together, these will combine to make a very nice collected dust effect on this. So in order to do this as in terms of a wash, I've got my clean terps right there, my spirits. I'm just bringing some over here because I'm not going to make a lot. You should always start with your darker color, actually. It's a little bit of a rule here. So I've turned this super thick effect now into a wash. You can see that's just real runny. So we're like at, almost water, dirty water here. And that's what a wash is. And I'm simply going to wash. So I'm starting with a darker color, and you should always keep that in mind too, dark to light. You lay your background of darker color and then add your highlights with the light colors. But really all I'm doing here now is places where I think dust is going to accumulate, which is pretty much everywhere. I'm adding this cursed earth color, the little more yellow color. And right now I'm just kind of what I'm doing is, if you can see, I'm hitting along this top edge here, and it's flowing.
It flows, right.
And it just flows. And that's what I want, because when this dries, all that little puddle of stuff you're seeing there is just going to be pure color or light color. And that's going to be the effect of accumulated dust around some of these details. And so I'm just going to come up here and do the same thing.
Yeah, see, I was waiting for, this is the step I was kind of waiting for, that step where you kind of just let the wash kind of like flow around all these little tiny details, like all the hundreds of bolts.
Right.
So this is really the step where you do that right at the end, because I guess dust does sit on top of everything else.
Right, dust and dirt will be the last thing, because that's created by the movement of the vehicle. Add some dust on top here. And then where we got this grease stain here, we can do some real fun stuff. We'll just add some dust along this edge here. I'll just give one more layer of effect to this area. Again, right now I'm just simply using this cursed earth straight. I haven't mixed any color with it at all. These guys around here. Some accumulated dust back in here. Okay, so we're back. I've gone ahead and dried this a little bit, and you can see that our effects are now dried up on the top here. And we've got accumulations of dust around some of these points. A little bit sloppy right now, so all you got to do is take a brush, and you can just kind of blend it back in. So let's just say we want a little bit more of a feathered appearance to this, and we'll do that a little bit. And if that doesn't come off right away because it's dry, you can just add a little bit of spirits to it. Again, almost a dry brush, and just pull it off. Enamels are great because they just, again, your working time is quite long, and you can reactivate them. But for the most part, this looks pretty okay to me, because you see here now we've got, like around this corner here, got the accumulations of dust starting here. We've got kind of a dusty appearance starting right here. But that cursed earth is a darker color, so it doesn't show up against this dark color very well,
right.
Very pronounced, but that's okay, because now what we can do, but we needed a base, because we're trying to, again, build in layers here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to this lighter Africa dust that we showed earlier, and load up an area with that. So, and we're going to do the same thing we just did. Highly thinned, diluted mixture of this stuff, and we may, instead of we might not use it in such big areas, so we're going to go over the same areas we just used the cursed earth on, but we're going to be a little bit more stingy with it, because we want this to be a little more precise. So, whoops. So let's just say we want to enhance this area right there. We want a little bit stuff coming up here, and we don't have to be. I might do 2 bolts here, but just leave one of them alone. We want this top here, a little bit right there. A little bit more dust blew back in this area for some reason. Around here, let's go ahead and get this thing to pop a little bit more. So we'll go ahead and add dust around this bottom corner here. Let's go ahead a little bit more up here too. Be a little different because we've already got our cursed earth on the bottom, but we added nothing on the top, so it'll be slightly different. Okay, so we've got this dried up, and you can see the effects are kind of stark. I've got a lot of little white patches and such going here. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust these colors slightly by a couple different methods. One, I'm going to, like we did before, I'm going to brush back some of these effects to kind of feather them out in certain areas. So I'm just going to brush these back a little bit because I don't want it to look like it's gone through a chalk factory. And this is normal. This is part of the back and forth we keep talking about.
Right.
I mean, there's a few kind of funny places, like back in here I can see. And I'm just going to kind of blend those away. But that's not looking so bad. I can live with that, actually. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and decide that this is, for our purposes today, far enough along to keep moving along in the weathering part. So now we're just going to go ahead and put this. So this will take me about 2 minutes here to glue this together, and we'll come back. So we've got this roof. Remember, we made this quite a while ago, scratch built that little thing, and then we did some chipping on it. And this has been sitting here ever since, but now it's time to start giving it a little bit of personality. And what we're going to do is just use some of these effects that we have, and we're going to have kind of a oxide rust effect when we finally get done here, but I wanted to have some variation, so I've chosen 3 colors. This is a track wash brown, which is kind of a reddish brown color. Then I've got the light rust and the rust streaks that we've already been using on the engine. So, and again, I'm going to do this by first pre-moistening my area with the brush. Again, I'm just using a flat brush. And you can see all I'm doing is just barely getting any color on there. And then with the thicker ones, I'm just going to go ahead and put a drop. You can see I'm just kind of in the center of some of these larger areas of rust. I'm just going to let that sit on those and just kind of spread out. Again, the moisture from the pre-moistening is kind of letting it distribute out. And you can see how in certain areas, like in here, it's kind of following the contour of the chips that we rubbed in here. Again, there's a little bit of surface differentiation between the underlayer and the overlayer. So it's kind of staying in those grooves in there and kind of bleeding into the rust area that we made. With all these, like I said, the rust streaks and things like that, anything that you use these thicker streaks on for them to actually reach their potential, they have to sit on the surface for a few minutes, because otherwise you just blend them away. So we need this to sit here for just a few moments, and then we're going to come back over the top of that with some of these other effects. So let me come back in about 3 minutes. Okay, so this is sat here for just a couple of minutes. And one of the things I want to show you real quick on these streaking effects, like I said, we've got them in here, they kind of pooled into there, but let's play a couple of games here. Let's play a couple of what ifs. Remember how we've got this little bit of a slant to the roof? So if rain hits down, coming down this way, it's going to come and roll off to the front, right? That's kind of our working idea here. So we're going to streak some of this going forward. So we're going to pull some of these stains down slightly. It's real nice and subtle. But this is going to be starting some interesting ideas, and actually I'm going to reinforce that just slightly. Pull these down. We don't have to do every one of them. And we just blend them away. Those will just kind of sit there under the surface right now. So we're going to do a lot more to this. And we can keep reinforcing them from time to time. I want to get a little bit more reinforcement in this area. And one of the things I'm noticing here, you can see just by the angle I was holding it, that my streak kind of has a half moon shape there, and I want to take care of that because I want this to come straight down. So it's a little more realistic. And of course I want to tidy up the bottom edges here, but I'm just going to bring those down like this. So now we're starting to build up our stains on this roof here, just ever so slightly. So a little bit of color variations on this. So in this corner up here, we're going to pre-moisten this again just to dry it out. I'm going to take some of this track wash color. I'm just going to dab that in here like this. I'm just going to do this corner up here because what we're going to do is just kind of make this a little bit oxidized different on this corner than the other corners. And we'll come back and blend that in a second. And then let's say over here in the center section we got all this rust coming we're going to go ahead and take some of this rust wash and put that over this area. And again, we're just going to let this set for a second. And you see I'm just kind of dabbing right now. We can move these around a little bit later, but I kind of want the colors to establish themselves on the surface. And for that, it kind of has to dry for a minute. And one of the things I do know is that we want to make sure we get these corners over here. So I'm just going to, these I'm actually going to kind of brush down real quick just so I don't forget them, but we'll clean them up in a second. I took it under the hairdryer for just a brief moment, like 30, or about 5 seconds actually, and it sat here for about 30 seconds afterwards, just kind of setting up. Because one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure that the colors get established on the surface before I start trying to blend it. Otherwise, we just wipe it back and forth. And again, I'm going to follow those same motions of, let's pretend the dividing line, well, the dividing line is right about here. So everything from here down is going to be streaked down this way. So I'm just going to pull these along like this. And again, these processes are things that have to be repeated over and over again. We're building up slowly. And in this area up here on the roof itself, this I'm going to bring it backwards, but I'm mostly just trying to reactivate it and blend it right now, not so much streak it. So I'll kind of come back this way. I want this to become discolored and dirty and stained without necessarily showing motion, whereas I have motion on the front parts of it. And if you remember, I kind of did some work over here, so I'm just kind of making sure I kind of remember all the parts of it. So we've got a little bit of that there, and I want to reinforce some of these streaks. So you can see, like right here, we've got some nice streaks starting to come down here, and what I want to do is reinforce that. So I'm going to start here and work my way down. And this is going to work better because what we've done, we've already established some staining in here by these first couple layers. So now this doesn't look quite so out of place. Otherwise, it would just look like a bunch of, I don't know, blood dripping down here. But because we have some stains already established, it's got some context. And I'm going to change to a little bit of the lighter color here. And then this darker wash brown is going to reinforce this area a little bit. And we can streak this off too. These are kind of streaking off for no apparent reason, but it will look cool. Now these streaks right here we'll have to let dry again because we need them to establish themselves onto the surface.
Before you go and blend them again. Right?
Before we blend them again. And so they'll kind of soften up a little bit, and then they'll establish. And see, like this area right here, I can tell that this is looking a little too pink for my taste. So I'm going to go ahead with this darker color because a lot of times rust, you'll see it has lots of different colors to it. And I'm going to do something like that. Really show some kind of deeper oxidation in here. And this will actually help things along. And right now I want these to stay kind of where they are. I don't want to streak them around. These are just going to be really kind of hot spots on the surface. Or, I don't know if hot spot's the right word. So we're going to leave that alone for just a second, and I'll come back on this. So we've let this dry actually just by air this time, and it's been about, I don't know, maybe 3-4 minutes, 5 minutes maybe. So you can see this is all kind of dried back up. Those streaks that we added are sitting here right now, and they've become a little bit affixed to the surface. So now I'm going to go ahead and change my brush. I got another flat brush, but this is a little bit thinner one. This is a number 2 because I want to be a little more precise in my work. But once again, keeping in mind that whole little concept, we're going to pull straight down here. I need to switch this so I can see it. And I'm just going to pull these down and blend these streaks away. And this you could do to whatever degree you want to. Clean the brush a little bit. And
so the idea is not to build up a water stain within like one layer or 2 layers. It's to really, really gradually build it up.
Because keep in mind that these streaks in real life are caused by repeated rain. You know, first it has to get a blister, the blister has to pop, the metal has to be exposed, it has to oxidize, it has to rust, and then the motion of water running through the rust will cause these little streaks.
Right, it takes years.
And it takes, yeah, it can take a lot of time, and it's, you know, a slight little drip over time that causes these larger, longer runs. Right. So you want to kind of create your effects using that same principle. I'm going to add a little bit more to this part here, but I think we're just going to leave this alone for a while and see what happens. Again, I pre-moistened my area.
Okay.
So we'll let that dry, and we're going to move ahead, and I'm going to switch gears here, put some new colors out on the table here, and we're going to start weathering the tractor itself. So we're back, and we're going to switch gears now from what we were doing on the roof, using those effects, to using the same type of effect to create our mud and dust and the earth tones on this model overall. So one of the first things I want to do, when we get to the bottom, we're on the underside here, you know, towards the tracks and stuff, we're going to go very heavy with what we do. We're really going to create some volume to this dirt. Like, it's been really running through some pretty adverse conditions. But what we want to do as we move up the vehicle, and you'll again see this if you look at references, is that, you know, the top of the vehicle doesn't get totally muddy. It just gets dusty and dirty, and rain has as much of an effect as the mud itself. So what we want to do then is to establish some tones that will carry up and down on this thing, but not quite so heavy as an application. So for the top here, we want to add some dust effects. And so exactly same way we've been kind of doing this all along is we're going to pre-moisten these areas where we think there's going to be accumulation. So right now it's like down these little ridges right here, along these ridges here, maybe around the radiator cap, things like that, just to get things started. And I'm going to go ahead and use this Africa dust for the time being as my starting spot. And it's a light color. It's got a little hint, you know, it's kind of a cream color. It's got a little hint of yellow into it, but it's not as white, as light colored as the pure dust effect that we carry here. So I'm just going to touch these corners here and see if I can get it to slide around. There we go. And then I'm going to kind of, you know, dust, if we're traveling, and the dust is going to blow from the front towards the back, it's going to accumulate along this wall here a little bit. So not only am I going to try to get this dust to kind of zip around these corners using that pre-moistening to break that surface tension and carry it, but I'm going to extend the dust patterns out so some of these panel lines have like a little bit of accumulation on them. And you'll see, well, these processes are, again, something that has to be built up over time. This first application will almost disappear to the naked eye, but we have to start establishing our zones, basically. Again, we're kind of working from a middle tone here. In general, you want to work from the darker colors to the lighter colors. But on the roof, we're not going to go very, very dark. So this is about as dark as we're going to get. We'll probably enhance some of these lines a little bit later with a dark wash just to reestablish our definition. But in terms of the effect, the dust effect, this is probably about as dark as we're going to go. And I'll get into that a little bit in a second. I just reloaded my brush with some spirits on it. Still a dirty brush, still got the effect on it, but see, now that I got more thinner on it, it just really zipped down these raised details, and that's exactly what I'm looking to do. So I'm going to pull these around the front here a little bit too. And you can see I'm kind of dabbing and letting this kind of puddle and pool. When this dries, we can feather these back, and this will look a lot like just accumulated dust, this kind of blown and collecting in the corners. So we're going to continue to do that actually in quite a few areas along here. So as we move along here, another great place where dust and dirt's going to accumulate is right around these edges here. So I'm just going to, again, kind of expand out on the details here, on the surfaces here. Of course, along the back of the chair, you know, dust gets accumulated, knocked into that area. And you can see I'm just coming straight out of the cap right now. So I need this to be a little bit heavier. And there we go. And until it gets established, a lot of these effects just kind of, like I say, disappear. But don't worry, we'll be able to repeat this over and over again. I'm also not looking necessarily for uniform coverage. I want this to be, you know, kind of that organic, like where'd the dust go, and then we'll add some mud. Where'd the guy walk? Where'd he, you know, track dirt? Where did he wipe it off? All those things come into play now. And as long as I'm working, I can add a few spots of dust down here. It's going to kind of add a few spots of dust. This is mostly just to kind of get things established. Again, I'm going to go heavy with dust and dirt down here in mud. So this area will actually start fairly dark and end up lighter and we'll end up actually adding pigments and things to this as well. So there's quite a bit of work we're going to do down in this lower area. But in the whole theme of adding layers, this is only a first layer, and we have a long ways to go, so I'm not worried about those tide marks. I just want to get some ideas established. It's basically like a painter just starting with broad strokes on a palette, not even sure where he's going with it necessarily, but he just needs to get started, and that's what we're doing right now. We're just getting started. So as I was mentioning, on these lower areas down here, we're going to want to start with something darker. So what I've got is an earth effect, which is a darker gray color, brown gray color. So this is obviously quite a bit different than the light dust we're using on top. And what I'm going to do is start applying this with much broader strokes, because what I'm going to do right now is start working on the tracks a bit too. So I'm just going to go ahead and take this is straight from the bottle actually right now, and similar to how we did the painting, I'm just going to do different track lengths.
Okay, and this is like more like a wash, right?
It's more like a wash right now, but we're going to blend this away too. But see what I'm doing? I'm hitting different track links with the color, so it's not just. Let me do it on the bottom here.
Right.
So you can see I'm doing that there. I've got every, I don't know, 2 or 3 links, just kind of randomly putting some color there, some heavier, some lighter. I'm going to take my Kursk earth now as well. And again, we're just establishing color, but we're doing it with broad strokes now because we got big surfaces.
So you're avoiding the where you put the.
Yeah, sort of. Like right here, this is on top of another one. That's why this is a little bit different color. I'm not necessarily avoiding, but I want to make sure I hit all the links too.
Right.
So we'll just kind of work our way around, and then maybe I'll add a third color to this mix as well. I have a dark mud color here too, which is just more of a natural brown.
So a much more darker brown, basically. You can see, compare the two.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna add this in a couple places. And then you talked about earlier, we were talking about the tracks and whether or not they would run in a linear manner for doing some effects. This is a time when you might do that. So maybe this brown color, you could go down the center section like this and add that type of effect. In this case, what we'd be simulating is maybe he drove across a patch of moist ground. So again, with broad strokes, we're just going to blend it. So I've got this pure turpentine here, or the white spirits, and I'm just going to kind of dab some stuff on here. And again, these paints are fairly thick, so I can touch them, and they don't want to move real easily, but I do want to move them around. I want them to wash. I want them to wash a little bit too. I want them to start kind of collecting in the recesses here. And you're saying, well, you're just blending all your work away. Well, to some degree, yes. And that's what I'm trying to do. But I'm also making sure that I've got good coverage. And of course, probably off camera, I'll take some time and I'll come along the inside of the tracks too, because of course that's going to need to be done as well. But let's just say on these earth effects, let's continue down here. This is a good color, and I definitely want to use this as perhaps establishing my base color paint. So I'm going to switch to a little bit smaller brush now, because I'm going to be not quite so broad strokes. But I'm going to do kind of the same thing I was doing with the white, or the dust effects, is I'm going to start coming in here and adding color where it would accumulate dirt and stuff like that. And again, right now, I'm mostly just concerned about creating color patches. You can see these dust effects have kind of blended away as they're drying, and they're starting to look fairly realistic. A little bit of thinner on this right now because I just want to make sure I'm getting this dirt color to kind of get into all this area right now. I'll come back in and add the accumulations right now, but I'm really just kind of, again, just establishing the zones up here in the front, like that. Kind of playing. I obviously I'm kind of considering a natural appearance, but right now is not really the time to really finesse them. I just need to get the colors in and established. Along this, obviously around here, this would have some color dropped into it. And of course around these points here, maybe color. And this would be And this is a pretty, you start looking at this, kind of squint your eyes a bit, and you can kind of see how we're starting to establish our zones of mud and dirt. Maybe get some mud that is splattered up there. Give me a few minutes and I'll kind of finish my way around this, and we'll come right back. Okay, so we're back after a little bit of I've applied the colors on the other side here, which we'll get to in a second, and it's had a second or a little bit of time to dry. And you can see, especially like on the tracks, we were going on pretty heavy with this, and as it dries, the effects definitely get more subtle. So this starts to get a surface now that we can really start to use. But we still got these same problems up here where this application of the color just does not look natural. It's in the right places, but it just doesn't look like it should. So what I'm going to do now is simply, I'm just going to feather this back, but not all the way, because I actually want this area to be to start establishing. So I'm just starting from a clean area. My brush is slightly moistened with the turpentine or the white spirits, just to kind of feather out the effects, get rid of that hard edge. And just really light strokes. And now it's looks a little bit more windswept as well. I'll do the same up here. I'm just going to pull it towards the center because that's where I want the accumulations to be. And I'm going to pull it towards the front. Now keep in mind, I'm going to go back over this with more color. So I'm not terribly worried about, I'm not wiping off the color. I'm just kind of fixing my corners a little bit, fixing my edges. But even at this stage, you can see that this is starting to look a little bit more like a natural accumulation of dust. And we'll get this back over here too. So this particular process is going to be going with these effects, just goes back and forth. You apply some color, wait for it to dry, and you go ahead and kind of tidy up the edges, and you apply some more color. All the time we're trying to be kind of organic in the way we approach this too, varying the color a little bit, dry mud, wet mud, and then establishing these bases of color that we'll be using. Again, we're not really worrying about the texture yet, although up here on the top where we have dust, this gets close to the texture we're going to get because that's just real nice and light. Down lower, we'll start adding different types of effects to get splatters and accumulations of dirt and mud and things like that. So you can see we're kind of working on this area right here. Just kind of feathering out that around those details there. Of course, the dust accumulates right in the cracks and corners and kind of goes away. And here, we can start kind of pulling this downwards a little bit, add a little bit of streaking onto that. So it looks like it's got to kind of wash down a bit. And what we're really doing there, see there's down here is the dark mud color I added.
Right.
So again, my brush right now is totally dry. I'm at a stage right now, the enamels are at a stage right now, they're just almost dry, they're a little bit tacky. So I'm able to kind of pull them right now just at this stage where they're at. And I'm going to pull these up slightly and just get a kind of a dirty edge on that bottom there. A lot of times, like I'm touching the thinner just slightly, clean off my brush, and like right here, to me it looks too uniform from top to bottom, so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of help define these streaks down here. There we go. Basically cleaned off a little area, and I'll make it a little more interesting. And I'll continue to do that around the model here. Move this to the back. We added a bunch of mud back here, so I'm just going to kind of brush that towards the rear. And then maybe reestablish a cleaner spot in the middle here. Like that. And then we'll work on, making this look like these tracks have really splattered this up here in a little bit. We get down here to the bottom. If you remember, we just kind of washed this in here, brushed this in here pretty heavily, and kind of dabbed it in here. What's interesting, and this is part of what you're going to have to keep in mind when you're using these types of effects, is this works as a dark mud stain partially because we have this lighter color right here. It's showing that we've got accumulation, we've got wet and moist earth right against a lighter covering that's dried out a little bit. So this dark over light right here is part of the reason why your eye is thinking it's starting to look a little bit more realistic. And we'll keep playing with that idea as we move forward on here. Try to make sure that we, in this case here, I like this dark demarcation right there, because that's, you see naturally all the time where water is splashed up and it's just moistened that area here, whereas the rest of it has had a chance to dry out. So, I'm actually liking this. I'm not going to do a lot of work on this. I might blend out this little bit of a tide mark right there. But I'm looking at the camera right now, and I could live with this as it stands. This is a great platform to keep building on. So I'm going to spin this around slightly. I'm going to go to the other side where I applied while you guys were off camera. And you can see here I applied quite a bit heavier on this, especially on this shield coming down, because we know that the purpose of this piece right here is simply to deflect the dirt and stuff that comes from the tracks off this platform here. So this is going to get all sorts of stuff. And again, now we know that because this stuff's going to hit here and drop down, that our motion should be a downward motion. And what I've done is I've applied lighter colors kind of down in the middle and towards the bottom, and I've got some darker colors up to the top here. And so as I pull down, I'm pulling down these darker colors over the lighter colors to start streaking a little bit. This is a little on the wet side still, so it's moving around. But again, I don't mind this right now. We're just applying color, establishing basically some parameters of where we're going to be working or a little bit later, excuse me. And this should probably dry a little bit more. Got a bunch of different colors going on here. I'm just going to kind of blend these out slightly. But I'm not going to put the light color over the top of the dark color. I want that demarcation.
Right.
Just kind of blend them out a little bit, soften those edges slightly. And here, I've actually got paint on my brush from doing this over here. I'll just kind of come back underneath this one here. Just kind of dabbing. I add a little bit of color to the bottom there. And just kind of feather out that edge slightly. So, in reality, this probably needs to dry slightly, a little bit more before I get too carried away with that. When this dries, this streaking pattern will become more pronounced. Let's go ahead and keep in mind, one of the things you want to do is not always just add more color, but by taking off color, by leaving cleaner areas, that's another way of making streaks and more interest to your pieces. So I'm doing that as well. Just kind of playing with heavy concentrations, light concentrations, dark color, light color, different colors of brown that we're seeing through here. I added some dust up here to the front here. Right now, this is not even really showing up that much. I mean, I could tell that this is fairly irregular and doesn't look very good. But rather than, at this moment, blend this away, because there's really not much coverage, I'm just going to go ahead and leave that. I'm going to come back in and add more to that one, I think. And that will help me. So I'm just kind of establishing a base on this. And along the back here, you can see I've added some color up in this area here, too, just where the mud's going to come off and accumulate on these returns. Not really much to do back here. This is going to get filthy dirty, so I'm just going to kind of let this get established.